Quincy Jones spent 60 years proving that genius without discipline is just noise. Kobe Bryant was in the gym before dawn, not because he had to be, but because that was the only standard he accepted. Steve Harwell knew what it meant to own a stage. Richard Lewis turned decades of anxiety and obsession into a comedy career that never stopped evolving, right up until the end. Anne Heche refused to be defined by anyone else's version of her story. Michael Jackson rehearsed moves that would never appear in the final show, because the pursuit of it was the point. She does not walk onto a set and wing it. That is the first thing anyone who has worked with Oprah Winfrey will tell you. Before the cameras roll, before the audience settles into their seats, before the first guest takes a breath, Oprah has already done the work. She has read the book cover to cover. She has reviewed the research. She has sat with the questions long enough that they feel like her own, because by that point, they are. That discipline is not incidental to her career. It is the career. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born in rural Mississippi in 1954, and the circumstances were not gentle. Her grandmother taught her to read before she was 3 years old, and that early literacy became the foundation of everything, not as a feel-good origin story, but as a practical tool. Reading was how she absorbed other people's realities. It was how she learned to ask the next question. When she moved to Milwaukee to live with her mother, and later to Nashville with her father, Vernon Winfrey, it was his insistence on structure and books and accountability that gave her a working method before she knew she needed one. He required book reports. He required preparation. She has said in interviews that she did not always appreciate it at the time. She appreciates it now. She was on radio at 19. Television in Nashville followed quickly. But the moment that reframes everything is 1986, the national syndication of what became The Oprah Winfrey Show. That launch did not happen because she was charming, though she was. It happened because she had spent years developing a specific skill, the ability to make a subject feel both intimate and universal at the same time. She could sit with a guest and make the 20 million people watching feel like they were the only other person in the room. That is not a personality trait. That is a craft, and it takes repetition to build. The show's production schedule was relentless. 25 seasons, more than 4,500 episodes. The research that went into each one was documented by producers who worked with her. The pre-interviews, the guest preparation, the way Oprah would arrive knowing not just the public story, but the emotional architecture beneath it. Former producers, including those who later spoke to the press for retrospective profiles, described a host who was never passive, never coasting. She pushed back on guests. She changed direction mid-conversation when something more honest presented itself. She was willing to have a bad interview if honesty required it. In 1988, she acquired ownership of her show through Harpo Productions, a name that is her own reversed. That decision is frequently cited as a turning point in American television history, not because it was glamorous, but because it was strategic in a way that very few people in television at that time, in her position, were thinking. She owned the content. She owned the distribution relationship. She controlled the creative decisions. At a moment when black women in media had very little structural power, she engineered her own. The business move preceded the cultural dominance. That ownership mentality shaped everything that followed. The Oprah magazine, launched in 2000 and became almost immediately one of the best-selling magazines in launch history. The Oprah Winfrey Network, OWN, launched in 2011. It struggled in its early years. That is documented, publicly discussed, and worth naming directly. The ratings were lower than projected. The programming took time to find its footing. Oprah herself acknowledged the difficulty in interviews during that period. She invested more personally, moved her base of operations to Los Angeles, and took a more direct role in the channel's programming decisions. By 2013, OWN had turned profitable. The turnaround was not a miracle. It was a correction made by someone willing to look at the failure honestly and respond with work rather than spin. Her investment in talent has been a defining feature of her professional identity. She did not just interview Dr. Mehmet Oz or Dr. Phil McGraw on her show. She produced their subsequent television careers. The Oprah Winfrey Show was, among other things, a launching platform, and she understood that explicitly. Whether that influence is viewed as generous mentorship or as a concentration of media power is a legitimate conversation, and it has been had publicly. Critics have noted that the figures she elevated sometimes spread health information that was contested by the medical community, the so-called Oprah effect, cutting both ways. She has not always engaged directly with those criticisms, which is itself a documented feature of how she manages her public profile. Her work as an actress is sometimes treated as a footnote. It should not be. Her performance in The Color Purple in 1985 earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She had no formal acting training. What she had was the same tool she used in interviews, the ability to locate the emotional truth of a moment and inhabit it without apparent effort. She returned to acting in Selma in 2014, playing activist Annie Lee Cooper, and produced the film through her company. Behind the camera and in front of it, she has rarely distinguished between the two roles in terms of the seriousness she brings. She has also been a book publisher's most powerful ally and most complex partner. The Oprah Book Club, launched in 1996, moved books in numbers that no marketing budget could replicate. When she selected a title, it sold. The relationship with Jonathan Franzen and the novel The Corrections in 2001 became a minor cultural episode when Franzen expressed ambivalence about being selected and Oprah ultimately withdrew the invitation. She did not comment extensively at the time. The episode illustrated something real about the power she held and the expectations that came with it. Her public confrontation with the beef industry in 1998 is one of the more instructive episodes of her career. After a segment on mad cow disease, cattle prices fell, and a group of Texas cattlemen sued her under agricultural disparagement laws. She moved her show to Amarillo, Texas, for the duration of the trial. She won. The case affirmed the First Amendment rights of broadcasters in a way that had legal implications beyond her specific situation. What it demonstrated about her personally was a willingness to spend money, time, and public attention defending a position she believed was factually justified. She did not settle quietly. She has spoken openly about weight, about therapy, about her experiences of childhood abuse, and about spirituality. These disclosures were not spontaneous. They were deliberate, calibrated revelations made on her own terms, in her own time, on her own platform. The 1995 interview, in which she first publicly discussed surviving abuse as a child, was viewed by an audience in the tens of millions. The effect on public conversation about childhood sexual abuse was measurable. That is not an accident of fame. That is media deployed with intention. Her philanthropic work has been similarly structured. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa, which opened in 2007, was a project she funded personally and has remained personally involved in. The school faced a crisis in 2007 when a dormitory matron was accused of abusing students, a situation that required public accountability and institutional response. Oprah flew to South Africa. She met with the students and their families. She did not issue a statement from a distance. The school has continued, and its graduates have gone on to universities across the world. The episode, including the crisis and the response, is documented in detail in reporting at the time. In 2018, she delivered a speech at the Golden Globes that generated serious public speculation about a presidential run. She did not pursue one, and she said in subsequent interviews that the work of governing did not align with what she believes she is built for. That is a notable act of self-knowledge, understanding the difference between the desire to influence and the capacity to execute a specific form of public service. She has continued to use her platform in political contexts, campaigning for candidates including Barack Obama in 2008 and Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock in Georgia's 2020 Senate runoffs. Her 2021 interview with Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, became one of the most watched television events in years. The preparation for that interview was characteristic, structured, researched, deliberately paced. She asked questions that were specific and well-sourced. The interview generated international response and became part of a broader public conversation about the British royal family that continues. Whatever one thinks of the subjects or the institution, the interview itself was a masterclass in the technique she has spent decades refining, the art of creating space for a subject to go further than they planned. She continues to read. That is not a metaphor. She continues, by her own account and by the continued operation of the book club, to consume books at a pace that most people would find difficult to maintain, alongside the rest of her schedule. The reading is the work. The preparation is the work. The willingness to sit with a subject long enough to understand it. That is the whole method, applied across television, film, business, publishing, philanthropy, and public life for more than 4 decades. There is a version of this story that reduces Oprah Winfrey to warmth and inspiration. It is a less accurate version. The more accurate version includes the lawsuits, the failed early own ratings, the contested influence, the strategic ownership decisions, the calculated disclosures, and the relentless preparation that made all of it possible. That version is also more interesting, because what it describes is not a woman who became powerful by accident of personality, but one who built a media infrastructure through disciplined, specific, repeated work, and who has not stopped doing that work. The microphone is still on.